Hello, and welcome to Conversations with me, Dr. Theo Blackmore, part of the Discover Voices Media Network. Hello, so thank you very much. This is the latest Discover podcast, Discover Plus podcast for Disability Formal and the Art of Silly. And today I'm talking to
John Pring, and I am editor of Disability News Service. I'm a disabled journalist, been doing this about 15 years, and on edge because my book, The Department, is coming out in almost precisely 7 days' time now, all about the Department of Work and Pensions.
Brilliant. I mean, normally these podcasts take about an hour, but you've just done it in about a minute. So thank you very much.
There we go. Done.
Yeah, no, I'm just joking. So obviously, your the Disability News Service is how people may well have heard your name, John Pring. So how long that started 15 years ago? So what year was that then? 20?
Yeah, 2009,
Okay.
April. I started it at the start of the tax year, so it was precisely 6th of April 2009 was when I started working on it. And became 15 years, and it's built up, very slowly but gradually over those years, with a lot of support from the disabled people's movement, disabled people's organization, and individual disabled people. But yeah, so I've been doing, I mean, it's a news agency, so I write my news stories about disabled people and about, issues of concern to disabled people, particularly around rights, equality, independent living, benefits, poverty, bit of arts and culture, but not as much as I'd like in a perfect world. And then I send them out to my subscribers every Thursday and put them on my website a bit later as well.
It's quite ubiquitous. It's kind of everywhere, the Disability News Service. I see it quoted a lot. People use it a lot. I mean, most of the major disability organisations use it and refer to it, like Disability Rights UK and lots of disabled people's organisations use it. Did you ever have it in mind that it would be it's kind of quite a big deal, that it would be such a big deal as it is?
Yeah, I mean, that's really nice to hear that. I mean, I think, well, I know when I started, because I've been working at Disability Now magazine, which doesn't, you remember? Yeah, you remember that from years back, but that doesn't exist anymore. And I was made redundant, and at the end of 2008, and I was casting around, what do I do next? And I was convinced that there was a real lack of the proper in-depth reporting on disability issues. There was lots of comment, lots of features, and there still is now. But I just knew that there was a real gap there. And I thought, well, okay, well, maybe I can try and fill it. And in the early days, it wasn't so much focused, to my shame, it wasn't so much focused on disabled people's organizations. That was something that gradually, that realization that that's what it really should do. So I had a few disability charities that supported me in the early couple of years, but it really grew into something that was very much focused on what disabled people and disabled-led organizations were talking about and campaigning on. So I'm really happy that if it's got any kind of influence and importance or whatever, then that's among DPOs, then that's, well, not job done, but that really makes me glad. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, so disability, you mentioned Disability Now then, which was it's kind of a broadsheet. This was back in the days before the internet. It's kind of a broadsheet
Oh, yeah.
newspaper almost, but that was produced by Scope, I think, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. Said about that the better, I guess. But but no, I mean, it wasn't a bad place to work. We were editorially independent. That was always the thing with Disability Now. And I joined, was it 2001, I think, when the editor was Mary Wilkinson, and then Sarah Hobson was editor for a while. I was acting editor for a bit, and then Ian McRae came in, and he was the last editor. And so I left just about the time when they were starting to move online. So they've been online for a couple of years. And it was still trying to find its place, and it couldn't quite find its place, I think, after it moved online. I think that was the issue. I mean, yeah, it was always published by Scope, but it served a really important purpose for a number of years because it really did a great job. And obviously, it would have been fantastic. It would have been published by a DPO or something. But no, it did a great job. And you look back in the archives at some of the stuff they did, it was really, really important.
I mean, I remember it back in the day. I remember you could go into WH Smith's, I think, and you could buy it off the shelf. I think it was that sort of.
Yeah, it was available on the newsstands for a while. I think that stopped. I think eventually, and I can't remember why. I mean, it was always a struggle to make it financially sustainable. But we had a brilliant advertising team of two people when I was there. Patrick Patrick Durham Matthews and Richard Gresham was the advertising manager. They did a fantastic job, keeping the revenue coming in. And yeah, I think it served a really important purpose, particularly before the internet took over and social media. There was no social media in the days when I was there. I think Twitter just about starting when I left. And so yeah, it's a very different mechanism, of course, back in those days of getting the word out and getting the stories in, because these days so much of, I wouldn't say a lot of my stories come from social media, but some of them do, and you have to pay so much attention to what's going on because instantly you get stories coming in. Whereas before it was like, you maybe get a letter coming in and then you'd look into it. You'd get press releases sent through the post. It's a completely different scenario these days.
It's mad, isn't it? 'Cause I remember back
Mm.
in the 1990s, I became a disabled person back in '93 when I, anyway, got diagnosed with MS and I came back to the UK, but there was no internet. Now, I did things.
Yeah,
I found out about an organisation. I went to a meeting in London. I live in the far southwest down near Penzance. And I
yeah.
found out about a meeting in London and drove there and went to this meeting up in the Holloway Road. And it was the Alliance of Disability Advice and Information Providers, ADAPE. They don't exist any longer.
Okay.
But I don't know how I found out about that. In the
Yeah,
days before the internet, I really don't know how we existed. I don't know how we did anything really.
yeah. I mean, when you look back at the late 60s, early 70s, how UPS got started, I mean, it's almost a miracle as to how they all heard about it.
Yeah,
Um, how, I mean, in some way, I know that wasn't quite the start of the disabled people's movement, but it was a very significant, development. I mean, that all started with a letter to the Guardian, didn't it? And I think letters being forwarded on to um, Hunt, I think, and it moving on from there. So something like that, I think, would have just been so much quicker and involved so many more people now.
absolutely.
That's
And so
yeah.
you work to disability now. So are you a trained journalist? Is that your training, as it were?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I started as I went to journalism college. I did university, and then a couple of years or a year or so, running around, not quite sure what I was going to do, and then went to journalism college for a year, and then worked on local papers, particularly the Slough Observer, Slough and Windsor Observer, which was, I don't know what it's like these days, but it was brilliant, a brilliant grounding in those days. I was there for about 4 years and gradually worked myself up to news editor. Worked in a couple of years on the Evening Telegraph in Coventry, including a year as a political reporter, and then freelance so that I could left. So I left the freelance so I could finish my book, which was my first book on this awful abuse scandal that helped to expose at the Observer, the long care scandal, people with learning difficulties, a couple of care homes on the edge of Slough. It was absolutely people don't know too much about it these days because one of the reasons why, I mean, it was a long time ago, but also it's one of the scandals where it wasn't exposed because of TV or because of hidden cameras or CCTV or anything like that. If there had been, it would be probably the most notorious scandal today. But things like Winterbourne View, people
Yeah.
still remember now from 10, 15 years ago, because there was pictures of what was going on. If people had pictures of what was going on at Long Care, I mean, it still sends chills down my back just thinking about some of the things that I reported on, and um, I talked to a couple of the people who'd lived there eventually. Um, just horrific. And these things, of course, are still happening. I think it's not quite as bad as it was in those days because the care inspection regime in those days was very, very hit and miss. I mean, talk about postcode lottery. I mean, in Buckinghamshire in those days, it was an utter disgrace. Um, and it was, it's an institution hidden literally behind very high walls, um, next to a country club. Would you believe it? It's actually joined onto a country club. You have people enjoying themselves in the country club, and they would look across to the other part of the building and see the residents to go. Hopefully, had no idea what was going on behind those inside. It was just staggeringly awful.
It's an amazing thing. For me, it's about when you said about big walls around the institution, when you have closed doors and big walls and you don't have a flow of people coming in and going out, then
Yeah,
these places just they they develop sets of behaviors which they replicate and reinforce. And it's that old thing that, oh, we don't do that around here, or we do things like this around here. And people
yeah,
get sucked into a whole different mindset. And it becomes, inverted commas, acceptable to do the most horrific things. And it's because there's no free flow of people going into and out of these places. And it was the same at Winterbourne View. The doors are closed and locked. And
yeah.
ostensibly for the safety of the people inside those places, but really it keeps these behaviors hidden away from everyone else's eyes.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And there was very little. One of the things, and I'm kind of racking my brains trying to remember that those days and those investigations, because again, it was about 10 years that I was kind of investigating that one. And there was very little interaction with the local community. There was a little bit, and it stopped the moment, there were one or two concerns passed on by one of the residents to kind of locals in Slough, and then he stopped Gordon Rowe, who was the person in charge. Um, and so there was very little interaction between the people that lived in the home and the local community. I mean, a lot of the local community just didn't, had no idea it existed. They had no idea this huge, there was about 60, it was 38 one of the homes and 28 in another. So what's that?
Well,
About 70 residents in a very small area, very little connection with the local community. I mean, it still has huge importance for today. Those lessons that should have been learned from long care, and a lot of them weren't. But also, I know you were saying that when closed doors and people not coming in and out. The other thing I think was really important was the fact that you have the abuser, the main abuser, and his wife were right at the top, and so the others beneath, when you talk about hierarchies or whatever, the care workers, etc. And not all of them. Some of them did actually speak out, but the care workers saw what was going on at the top, saw the brutal way and the horrific way that he was treating the residents, and physical abuse, and there was awful, awful sexual abuse as well. But particularly with the physical abuse and the neglect, people being given you know, um, one toilet roll to last for a week, and if you ran out, you ran out. And that filtered down, and so people that came in, young care, and a lot of very young care workers that hadn't worked in the sector before, and they came in and they saw what the boss was doing, and they just copied it. I mean, not to the same extent, but they definitely copied it.
that's exactly it, isn't it? It's that learned behavior thing. It's that, well,
Yeah,
this is what we do around here, so this is what I'm going to do. And in fact, you
hope
have to do it that way. Otherwise, you get ostracized and in fact probably get sacked if it's your
that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. They were forced out. They left. They were forced out. They were sacked. All those kind of things. A total institution. It was a total institution, and I can't remember now who came up with that phrase in the 60s, but this is what it was. It was a total institution, and it was and it only ended eventually because one particular resident who spoke out, um, so brave she was, and I've kept in touch with her over the years. I haven't actually spoken to her for a couple of years now. I must get back in touch with her. Dorothy, her name is in the book. She was just fantastic, absolutely fantastic, so brave. Um, because of what she saw around her, she still spoke out. And he exacted his revenge on her physically. She wasn't the only reason that the regime came down, but she was one of the key reasons.
And so you wrote a book about that.
Yeah, yeah. And so I wrote one version that came out in, goodness me, when did it come out? Must have been 2003 it came out. And yeah, it wasn't a particularly happy experience for me. And myself and the publisher had a few disagreements, I guess. And, I won't go into those, but it was okay. And then a few years later, I thought that I really, towards the end of my time at Disability Now, I was thinking, I'm really not happy with how that book worked out. And so I had another go at it. And basically, the first one was published, the second by a proper publisher, and the second one I just self-published it. And I thought, right, I want to do this the way I want to do it. And it was a lot bigger, it's a lot longer. And I was very happy with that second book. It came out in, I think, 2011, just a year or so after I started Disability News Service. And it didn't sell very many copies, but I'm very glad I did it. It's still there, and it's actually, thinking about it, it's the same color scheme as my new book, black and white, really.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll come on to that in a minute. But then you set up the Disability News Service, and that's basically you, isn't it? Do you employ other
Yeah,
people?
it is. Yeah, I'm constantly amused, or I don't know whether amused is the right word, when people, PR officers say, well, can either you or one of your members of your team come and cover this event for us? If you're busy, maybe you can send one of your team along. No, there is no team. No, it's no team. It's just me. I do very occasionally uh, I take some freelance pieces from disabled reporters, but I don't really have the funds to do that very often. And I do find that a lot of the disabled freelancers these days aren't really that into reporting. They're much more interested in features and comment pieces. And I mean, fair play, to be honest, it's more fun doing that stuff. It's
Yeah.
more artistic as well. You can stretch yourself maybe a bit more. And that's one of the issues, I think, because I'm getting past the mid-50s now, and I'm not going to do this forever. I do worry about what's left behind. I don't want to just leave this to the BBC, because they do their thing, but they don't do what I do anyway.
So it's a thing. So are you funded? Do you receive funding?
Uh, yeah. I mean, it's some of it is just voluntary contributions from people that read them. I put a little note at the end of my story saying, if you can afford to support, then please do. That'd be great. And I've got some organisations that subscribe as well, so I send them my stories every Thursday lunchtime. And one or two of them use them on their websites. Some of them just use them for briefing purposes. And then, I occasionally do some freelance pieces on top of that. So I did some work on the Museum for Austerity project with Sasha Ware's. Amazing. I always either put brilliant or amazing in front whenever I say Sasha Ware's name. Theatre producer. And did that with the National Theatre and the English Touring Theatre, and that's still going. So
it's I don't know. I mean, is it enough? Is it an income for you? Is it a regular income? It sounds a little bit hit and miss, a little bit.
No, it is a regular income, but it's enough to keep me going. Put it like that. So so I don't want people to think I struggle to keep going. Um, so I live a careful life. Call it a frugal life, I don't know. Um, but yeah, I'm not where I would like to be after 15 years of doing this. But there's so many people much worse off than me. I'm absolutely fine when it comes to income, but I certainly don't live a life of luxury, that's for sure. Um, but also, I should say the Deaths by Welfare project as well. I did that helped as well for a couple of years and I'll say that again, always, but either amazing or brilliant when I talk about China Mills, Dr. China Mills, who has led on that project as well. That's been really helpful as well um, for a couple of years. And, that's an amazing project too. I've worked on.
Brilliant. So, you've covered lots of stories. You've done lots of things. So it's been 2009 to the present day. So
Yeah.
I was trying to think about questions. What questions might I like to ask you? But
Oh yeah.
you've seen basically, so 2009 was a Labour government, and then
Yeah.
between then and now was a Conservative government, and then now we've got a new, I'm not going to say a new Labour government because New Labour became something else, but we've got a Labour government that's fairly recently off the blocks. I
Yeah.
mean, you've seen lots of changes throughout the time. You've seen different
Mm,
things. We've gone from
you'd
highs
think.
to lows. We've gone down the austerity route. We've disabled, you report it widely. What's the landscape in relation to disability in this country, in the UK now?
Ooh, well, you say we've seen lots of changes, but that's the thing. It's almost been an austerity news service ever since I started. I started the very worst point to start a business was April 2009. Really, um, we just had the global. We're right in the middle of the global recession. That was so. I mean, it was an awful time to start a business, but yeah, the landscape now. Yeah, I think at the moment, obviously, I think a lot of disabled people I know, a lot of disabled people didn't vote for Labour. Were not happy with a lot of things that Labour was saying in the election campaign, and I was constantly frustrated at what wasn't in their manifesto, what they weren't talking about, what they refused to talk about. But I think there has been a bit of a sigh of relief. Now the question now is what's going to happen next? And I'm not filled with confidence, but I know a lot of people saying it's going to be just as bad, and already been really negative about the new Labour government. I do think it's too early for that, but holding them to account just as fiercely as we all did under the successive Conservative governments, that's absolutely crucial. Because if we don't, absolutely we'll just get away with some of the things that the Conservative governments did because easy target, still an easy target. And one of the concerns also is, when the new Labour government came in '97, and oh, I should apologise to him because I always forget his name, and his book was really important, and I'll try and find the reference to it while I'm talking. I think it's Tom O'Grady, but he did some really important work on Labour and the changes they made and what they talked about as regards welfare reform in the '90s. And I saw this in my research in National Archives from a document, the minutes of one of the cabinet meetings that Tony Blair led in late 1997. One of the things they did was to make it absolutely clear that this is new Labour, not old Labour. We're going to be tough on what they called welfare, social security, disability benefits, cuts. And Tony Blair, you can see it in the minutes, that they're it's not in quote marks, but it's a kind of summary of what he said during that cabinet meeting. He said, we can't listen to all the critics. We have to, we have to be strong on this. Welfare is way too high and we've got to clamp down on it. And that was one of the things they did to mark themselves out as different from old Labour. And that's still one of my concerns. It's not that they, well, no, one of my concerns now is that they will use this as one of the things, being tough on Social Security, they will use this as one of the things to say, look, we're responsible. We're tough on spending, and look what we're doing with disability benefits. That's I fear that is one of the things they will do to mark themselves out and to gain plaudits from the right wing media. Let's be honest, try and get some plaudits from the Mail and the Telegraph and the Express and the Sun, all these newspapers that over the years have delighted in well, thrashing disabled people, claimants of benefits. It's just played a huge part in those deaths that we might talk about later.
I mean, it is almost the first thing that when they came out of the blocks, it's almost the first thing, the first headlines that were everywhere was how they're going to cut the spending on welfare benefits, and that will particularly affect disabled people, and they're sad at the numbers of people who are out of work and how that's increased, and the numbers of disabled people are too high, and all of this, that, and the other. It's a very common discourse, and it is the discourse that's been going for, ever since I can remember, really. With disabled people are always the ones that the first in the line to have the benefits cut and the last in line to have anything given back, as it were. And these are people who really depend on it because, as you know, disabled people are the poorest section of the whole community, and within that there are groups of disabled people who are even the poorest of the poor, as it were.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be very difficult. And the bit for me that was a little bit disconcerting was the idea about having a minister for disabled people. I don't believe he's called that anymore. I think the new person is called a minister for social security and disability?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the two things are being very closely tied up, and it's as if disability is only about welfare expenditure and it's only about the welfare bill.
Yeah.
And they've just tied them both so very closely together.
Yeah. And so Stephen Timms, and he is responsible for disability cross government. But yes, his title is Social Security and Disability. It does suggest that that's the main thing they're focusing on. Yeah, as I said, we're all kind of holding our breath at the moment. Maybe they'll come out with a fantastic, well, we're going to do this disability strategy and it's going to be fantastic, and we're going to talk about accessible transport and act on it. We're going to talk and act on accessible housing. They're clearly not going to act on social care, but that's a pipe dream, isn't it? But yes,
sorry, yeah, no, so sorry to interrupt you, but social care is just the elephant in the room. It's the one thing that everyone says we need to change it and sort it out, and then everybody just backs well away from it and nobody touches it.
Yeah, I'm Tony Blair. Mentioning it all the time at the moment. He launched a royal commission on social care in I don't know when he did it. Was it not? It was the late 1990s, I think. I think it was fairly early on. So, and he wasn't the first person to do an inquiry into social care, I don't think either. So, it's just that can must be pretty dented by now after being down the road so many times over the years.
There's so many roads with a can being kicked down it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what would you say then?
Let me just get this in, because I having quoted him quite frequently in my book. Tom O'Grady wrote that brilliant book. If anyone's interested in labour and social security reform in the 90s, particularly in the 2000s, read Tom O'Grady's book. It's really good. So I had to get there.
No, great. And something you mentioned earlier as well that I was going to pick up on as well. You talked about UPIAS, the Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation.
Yeah.
And they wrote something called the Fundamental Principles of Disability, which they didn't actually write. It's the minutes of a meeting between them and the Disability Alliance.
Yeah.
I did a podcast a while ago with Colin Barnes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Afterwards, he spoke to me and he said he was really kicking himself because he didn't talk about the Leeds Disability Archive. So I'm talking about it now, just to say that there is an archive of the Leeds Disability University, which you type it into Google Disability Archive, and you get so many documents, including the UPIAS fundamental principles and loads of other stuff as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's stuff there that you might have written as well.
That'd be great. They were pretty much the first group of disabled people to talk about oppression, weren't they, and about disability as oppression,
Yeah.
um, which is still important now. That oppression is still there, and that is what disabled people face. They are oppressed. I
Yeah.
think what was the title of one of their reports or one of their pamphlets? It was are we oppressed? Are we oppressed? Yes, basically was the answer, but that was the
Yes.
question. Yeah.
So covering the news stories since you have been, I mean, can you pick out a highlight and a low light? Is there what would you say is
Oh, that's a good
either of
question.
those things?
Yeah.
When
God.
were things particularly, when were things good or when were things better?
But that's the problem. It's 2009 was when I started.
Yeah.
I'm going to have run some positive stories, and I hope they haven't all been grim. Um, God, I can't think of anything positive I've written that really stands out. I know that's really awful.
Although
Um,
there are things that you are doing now with disabled people's organisations when you're bringing bits of the work from the local perspective to a national audience.
yeah, yeah. So, for instance, I did, it's really been quite widely shared, which is great. Inclusion Barnet project um, on uh, basically tackling barriers locally. It's a peer support scheme, and they've just got about another £600,000 over the next few years to keep it going. And it supported hundreds of disabled people in the borough of Barnet, which is North London. Um, and how it seems to work is, you're a disabled person, you're facing obstacles, you know, various goals you want to achieve, whether they're kind of social goals or work goals or just independent living, or just in one case, um, talked about just going out for a walk every day. And they give you a peer support worker who's a disabled person, and they just work to dismantle those barriers. And it seems to work really well. And it's just one of those projects that does fill you with a little bit of optimism that you know the could be a way forward, but also raises the question: why on earth is this not being done more? And also, well, this is really what Labour, the old Labour government, when they were doing some of their good stuff back in the 2000s, and I think maybe Anne Maguire was a minister for disabled people at the time, and she was one of the good ministers, I think. Um, uh, Talking about a centre for independent living in every local authority area. That's probably not quite what centres for independent living would have been set up to do, but that's one of the things you kind of think, get one of these, disabled people's organisations in every borough in the country, put this project in, and imagine the kind of, impact positive impact that might have. Because it's probably 1 in 2 of my calls I get in or emails I get in every week, probably more than that, is from disabled people saying, I don't know what to do. I've got this real problem. Can you help me with it? And it's the worst part of my job is saying, I can't, and I just can't be your advocate. I can't support you. Here's my advice and information page with organisations that hopefully we'll be able to. But that's um yeah, projects like that do fill you with a little bit of enthusiasm. But where's the funding? I mean, so many DPOs are struggling for funding. Um, yeah, stories like that, and lots of DPAC stories when they've been out, disabled people against cuts out protesting, and Inclusion London's accessible housing protest that went on was it last week? I think it was last week. They do fill you with some enthusiasm and optimism for the future. There's lots of brilliant work being done around the country. Greater Manchester Coalition to Disabled People. Um, I mean, Disability Wales doing great stuff as well. Um, so yeah, um, so that's the good stuff. God, the bad stuff, I don't know. I'd probably resort to talking about the DWP. I'm afraid those are probably the stories that stick in my mind. And I
Yes.
saw the first. I was trying to find out records of who was keeping the records of these deaths that we knew were happening, were linked with the DWP's actions and their cuts and the work capability assessment and all those things, all those terrible things were happening in the early 2010s. And I was just thinking to myself, right, where are the records going to be? Who is keeping records of this? Coroners, maybe? And um, they weren't. There weren't records being kept, certainly not publicly. But I went to the Coroner Society and they said, um, have you looked at prevention of future deaths reports? And there was actually an archive of these prevention of future deaths reports on the Ministry of Justice website. I don't think anybody really knew about this archive. I'd never seen it before. No one I knew had ever heard of it before. And it was an archive of all the reports that are sent out to public bodies or even private bodies by coroners when they hear an inquest and think, right, something's got to be done because this will happen again if action isn't taken. So they send these reports out to, for instance, the DWP. And this report was sent out following the death of Michael O'Sullivan in North London. He died in September 2013. And his inquest was just a few months later. And because of the efforts of his family, particularly his daughter, it was a really important inquest, and it really probed and it got evidence from the people that need to give evidence, like DWP and Atos at the time. The assessor carried out that assessment, and the coroner Mary Hassel wrote this prevention of future deaths report to DWP. Nobody knew about it at the time because there wasn't any journalist coverage at the time, but I saw it was on the archive. So that was that first report, I think, on Michael O'Sullivan's prevention of future deaths report was probably the one, because that sparked quite a lot of other work in the following years.
There's quite a lot. There's an awful lot in there, but I mean, why don't the mainstream press pick up on these things? That's a thing that you think people would know about.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, to be fair, when is a big case like Michael O'Sullivan's, it is picked up on. Errol Graham's, for instance, who missed his work capability assessment. He was incredibly unwell. He was just locked in his flat. He ran out of money. He'd cut himself off from his family. He refused, and I hate it when his family get abused. Why didn't you help him? Why didn't you help him? They were knocking on his door. He refused to talk to them, to accept any help or anything, because of he'd had to be sectioned and he blamed them. He just locked himself in his flat. He starved to death. He missed his work capability assessment. They stopped all his benefits. His gas was cut off. He starved to death. And that story, there was a huge spike. I think it was one of the Guardian's most popular stories, I think, in their society stories ever. But then it comes down again, and then it's all forgotten. So there are spikes when it's a story that does hit kind of nerve. But so many stories. I mean, recently there's just, I feel like I've been shouting into the void a little bit because almost nothing is reported. Hopefully there'll be some reviews of the book, and that will help. But I do wonder, and I do think, if it had been other groups in society, I think there would have been more attention paid to it. Those other groups are receiving rightly. I'm not saying they shouldn't receive the attention they get. I'm just saying that disabled people should receive that level of attention. And I don't, it's for some reason, well, we know what it is. It's disableism.
It's disableism and it's stigma and it's taboo. I think we're all of these things, and it's quite an amazing thing to think that in the 21st century we are still there. There was a program I saw on TV, and it was years ago now, but it was BBC Three, and it was Sophie Morgan doing a documentary called "The Worst Place to Be a Disabled Person," and she travelled the world trying to find out where people are treated the worst, and came across Ghana. And it's terrible what's happening in different places around the world.
Yeah.
You would hope that we would be somewhere else in a different situation, but
Yeah.
Every now and again, something comes to light and it's awful.
Yeah, we're to blame in the media. Say they, the media, I'm part of the media, we're to blame for it. I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever.
Yeah.
We'll get the inspiration for during the Paralympics, and everyone will feel good about posting about how inspirational the Paralympians are. And then we'll go back to I suspect Labour will announce their cuts shortly after the Paralympics, and I'm laughing because it's what happened before.
Well, in 2012 when we had the
The
Paralympics,
juxtaposition of the Paralympics with austerity was so striking when it was in London. You know,
yeah, and George Osborne stood up and he got booed at
yes,
at the Olympics,
yeah,
Paralympics. Yeah,
yeah, and they didn't allow Maria Miller to, who was the Minister for Disabled People, didn't allow her to hand over any medals because you would have expected the Minister for Disabled People to be at a medal ceremony or two, but they
yeah.
thought, no, we're not letting that happen.
And so you've spoken a bit about your book, and your book's about to come out. What's your book called?
Mm.
Do you have a
Uh,
copy there? Can you hold it up to the
I
camera
do,
for
but
those who are doing the YouTube?
isn't it going to go backwards? Isn't it going to be
No,
like?
it's not backwards. No.
Oh, it's only backwards in my camera. Okay, so
Yeah,
there we go.
yeah.
That's it.
The
Uh,
department.
the department, God, I'm gonna have to read it out. How a violent government bureaucracy killed hundreds and hid the evidence. And I'm only laughing because this is my book and I keep forgetting the subtitle.
It's
I don't know why. I just can't keep it in my head. All right, but yeah,
a
it's
great book cover though. It's a crumpled up bit
oh
of paper on a black background.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely fantastic. The design is absolutely fantastic, isn't it? And I'm very um I'm very grateful for that.
And so, what's it about? As if
So
I,
it
I can
yeah,
you can tell from the title a bit what it's going to be about, but
yeah. So it's about, well, my kind of 10-year investigation into the DWP really, and how they were, the civil servants and ministers kind of spurred on by the private sector and the outsourcing industry.
you said DWP a few times. That's the Department of Work and Pensions, I guess.
Yeah, sorry, part for working pensions. Yeah, and their actions over and a very long period of time led to the deaths of, like I say, hundreds of disabled people, probably thousands. I had discussions with my fantastic editor, Neda Tirani, about this, and could we say thousands or was it hundreds? And we went for hundreds in the end because it's hundreds, it's probably thousands. But I wanted this book to be absolutely based on evidence and be everything in that book. We can prove it because we've got the documents are in the National Archives, the government documents, coroner's documents, family testimony, family reports, work capability assessment reports. Everything's proved. It's evidence. It's all evidence. We can prove the hundreds because this piece of research in 2015, really good research that found that 600 suicides were linked to the introduction of the work capability assessment for people who'd been on incapacity benefit over those just 3 years. We can absolutely prove it's hundreds. And I'm pretty sure it's thousands, but that's why it was hundreds. So, and then also telling the stories of some of those people that lost their lives, and just so grateful to the families of those people who've shared those stories over the years. Really distressing stories, and been massively supportive over the years, and yeah. So, and their stories are they're just grim. Also, it's all. I mean, the book is very much kind of beginning to end. There's not really flashing backwards and forwards um, in a confusing way. It's really following the story from the beginning to the end, from about 1989 all the way through to today, and follows the hugely important role that the disabled people's movement played in this catastrophe as well. I mean, there's absolutely no way that I would have written this book, that I would have uncovered these things without the disabled people's movement. The grassroots groups got there first, way ahead of me. I only started doing this work because they were writing reports, they were protesting, they were raising concerns about individual cases. DPAC, Disabled People Against Cuts, Mental Health Resistance Network, Black Triangle, Spartacus, which is less prominent these days, War on Welfare, Petition, Pat's Petition, all these groups were drawing attention to stuff way before I got it kind of stuck inside my head and got obsessed with it, as is my autistic way.
So it's, it's an amazing piece of work. How long have you been writing it for?
Well, it's difficult to say really, but I mean, because obviously the research has been going for 10 years. It really started around about 2000, early 2000s, because it was the projects in 2001, that kind of time. It was a Death by Welfare timeline project, and the Museum of Austerity projects have really got me going, saying, right, okay, I need to put this down into a book, and well, somebody needs to write the story, and it might as well be me. Probably should be me, because I knew I had more evidence than anyone else, and I knew where where all the no, I'm not going to use that metaphor.
No.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I knew where everything was.
Yeah. So, what one would hope is that the MPs all the MPs would be able to read it. I don't know if there's any way that you can ensure that MPs might read this book.
Do you not know about this?
I do know about this, but some of the listeners may not know about this.
Okay, good. I was about to tell you, so I thought it was going to be a massive coincidence. Oh, by the way, it was just yeah. So Black Triangle. So John McArdle from Black Triangle came up with this idea a month or so back. So grateful to him. Played a big part in all of this over the years, and supported by Ellen Clifford, who again is another incredible activist and author. So they and Michael S. Sullivan's daughter's been really supportive as well, which is fantastic. And so and lots of other activists who went to Geneva early this year to hold the government to account on its implementation of the UN Convention on the rights of disabled people. And so what John thought was, right, let's do a crowdfunder and raise enough money so that we can send a copy of the book to every Labour MP, because we know the Labour government is going to do something. It's going to introduce some reforms on the work capability assessment, PIT, on universal credit, on sanctions. Are they going to continue with the last Conservative government's policies, or are they going to do something different, more positive, more supportive? Right, so this is the perfect time. We need to let backbench, particularly backbench Labour MPs, know the history of this, because they won't know. Nobody, I mean, to be honest, the ministers won't know what's in this book either, because a lot of it's from the National Archives. And that's another bit I didn't mention, was I went to the National Archives, spent several months, not every day, but digging out documents from the 1990s, particularly, that show how this whole mess, how this whole catastrophe started. Memos from what was then the Department of Social Security, memo from the Secretary of State for Social Security in 1989 to John Major, who was in the Treasury at the time, saying, right, we need to cut benefit spending, disability benefit spending. We need to do it now. And how that worked through. And then Peter Lilly became the Social Security Secretary, and he introduced the kind of predecessor for the work capability assessment. And I've forgotten what your question was now.
The question was, if only you could get this to all the MPs.
Yeah. So they need to know this history. And the crowdfund has been so successful. Hopefully by the time this goes out, it would have reached its stretch target, but it's been so successful that we're going to be able to get a copy to every MP.
Every MP?
Every MP now, yeah. All 650 will get a copy of the book. Hasten to add that they're not full price books, that Pluto have discounted them for this, which has been great. And Pluto are the publisher. and this hopefully is going to be able to fund some other people to get it as well. So maybe some members of the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Assembly members, Northern Ireland Assembly members, some other people as well. So I'm just so grateful. They haven't done it for me, but I'm still so grateful that John and Ellen and Amory and everyone else who's involved in that a little WhatsApp group at Geneva, and they all kept in touch and talked about this after John mentioned it. So I'm just incredibly grateful to them. It's a really great, been a really great way to raise awareness of the book before its publication, and it's given it a really good starting point, hopefully.
I mean, there has been a lot of stuff to
Hopefully they'll
cover.
read it. Hopefully they'll read it.
Hopefully they will. I mean, there has been a lot of stuff to cover, but there has been a little flurry of books over the past 2 or 3 years, because Ellen Clifford, who you mentioned there,
Yeah,
produced a book,
yeah.
and Francis Ryan produced a book,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
there's your book now about to come out. There's, these, it is obviously something which, but interestingly, all of those people, apart from Francis Ryan, who is herself a journalist for The Guardian, I believe, yourself and Ellen, I'd bracket as disability activists, and that's where this information is coming from. Because it's interesting to me that it doesn't come, because I'm now working for the Bath Spa University, but it's interesting that these books don't come from academia particularly. They're very grassroots.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think Frances would probably call herself an activist as well, to be honest. Speak for her, but I suspect she would. But yes, yeah, absolutely. They all come from the grassroots, really. And like I said, that was how it was in the early days of exposing what the DWP was doing in the early 2010s. It came from the grassroots. And can I just mention, because I should have mentioned it before, Steve Laird was the one that did the cover design. It's fantastic cover design. I'm just very grateful to him for that. It's really striking.
It is a fantastic cover.
Mm.
But then there's a gap there, I think. So I think that academia should move into this space a bit, at least, and pull some of the weight out and do a bit of the work and do a bit of the kind of heavy lifting, because academia kind of has time and space to do that, and access to the resources, which will be much more difficult for activists and non-academics maybe to get hold of. It would probably lack a bit of the passion that probably will come across from your book, but this stuff needs to be documented and out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. But I should say there are, there not huge numbers, but there are significant numbers of bits of academic work that I do quote and write about in the book. And I mean the research from, I think it was 2015 on the suicides, and then there was another really fantastic piece, and oh, here I've come to the right page brilliantly. Brilliant. Dr. Jamie Redman and Professor Delroy Fletcher, March 2021. They were at Sheffield Hallam. I think they're still there, and they did some research into the kind of hostile environment at DWP and how DWP staff and managers inflicted psychological harm on benefit claimants, the unofficial sanctioning targets, pushing disabled people into work, those kind of things. And they interviewed civil servants who told them about the kind of things and the pressures and the kind of stuff that was going on at the time. That was a really important piece of work. And there's other bits of work as well. And then there's, kind of, she wasn't an academic, but she's kind of skated that boundary between academia and activism. Mo Stewart did some brilliant work and drew my attention to Unum all those years ago. And again, without her, I don't think, certainly a large chunk of the book would be missing. She's been brilliant at pointing out, did you see this? Have you seen this report? This was really important. This was 10 years ago. Have you seen this? She's been really good at, joining up all the dots and stuff. So, and she wrote a book as well. So, it's and I'm always terrified. I was terrified of writing the book that I would miss people out. because this isn't really my book. It has come from the movement. I think I just brought it all together.
I think there's a lot of that in all of us. Many ways, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the way you have to think about it. Is that we're helping each other up because there has to be someone behind us coming forwards. Otherwise, it all ends. As you said just now, when you finish at Disability News Service, you would hope that there will be people who would take it over and carry it on.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I think the only way it'll happen is some kind of social enterprise, because really doing what I'm doing is like 70, 80 hours a week.
Yeah,
I'm basically below minimum wage, so for the hours I do.
yeah.
Um, so I don't think anybody would really want to do that. I mean, maybe there's another autistic journalist out there who is so, focused and obsessed and has their, you know, um, routines, etc., that would allow them to do it. I don't know. I don't know. Um,
So we're coming to the end of the hour.
oh yeah, God, that's flown past.
Would you have a summary? I mean, it's difficult to think of a summary. What you'd like to say in sort of a closing remark or a
God, I really
how
don't.
would you
I
sum up
really
your
don't.
last 15 years, the
Yeah,
last
yeah.
20?
My brain's just gone absolutely. There's just white space in there now. A lot of static, I think, between my ears at the moment.
Well,
Um,
a question I would like to ask you is
okay.
how do you relax? What do you do? I mean, there must be a point when this just becomes almost overwhelming because there is such a lot that you're carrying around when you're writing these stories, and there's such a lot of difficult things and tragedy and difficulty.
Yeah.
How do you relax? What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. The tragedy. A lot of people say, "What? Why are you not traumatized by it?" And I've asked myself that question because I haven't become traumatized by it, despite all these awful traumatic deaths. And it's more about sadness and about really just feeling so sad about all these people that I'll never get to meet and all these lives lost. And been much more about, and that's probably just the way my brain works. It's just much more about sadness for me than trauma. But there has been a lot of sadness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I work, to be honest. I do try and force myself out, and I do. Over the last few months, I've been saying, right, get out either for a cycle ride or for a run, or for something or a walk every day, and I'm just about kept to that, apart from yesterday when it was just impossible. When I say run, I only run about 300 yards, even though I've been doing it for a year. I think I've got some kind of late onset asthma or something, which is I haven't quite got to the bum mark. So I can only, after doing it for a year, I can still only like run around my block of flats after 12 months of running. It's quite embarrassing.
Well, at
But
this time
anyway,
of year, as long as there's an ice cream shop on the route.
what's that?
I say at this time of year, as long as there's an ice cream shop on the route, then you're okay.
Yeah, yeah, there isn't, but yeah. So I'm taking 2 weeks off leave, and I will be combining. I'm going around to visit some of the families and taking a hand delivering books to them. So that'll be, and then combining that with a bit of going to visit some places in Wales that my ancestors came from, which would be nice, and we're looking forward to that. So that kind of thing is nice. But yeah, um, yeah, I watch a bit of sport. I do watch a bit of sport.
Brilliant. One
I
last
read a
thing.
lot. I do read a lot. There we go. I
You
read
do
a
read a lot.
okay.
One last thing. What's the release date?
Well, look, this is interesting because it's the 20th of August. But I keep seeing occasional social media posts from people saying I'm halfway through it. So although the publication date is 20, I think some of the copies have gone out. Um, but I mean that's great if they have. Um,
Great.
but I don't really know very much about the publishing industry. But I mean, I just saw something on Instagram. Someone said I'm halfway through it. It's really grueling, but it's great, but it's really grueling. Um, so I'm a bit amused by that because publication date is 20th of August. But you can pre-order it, and I suspect you'll get it pretty soon now, I think.
And sorry, who's the publisher?
It's Pluto.
Pluto
Pluto,
Press.
yeah, who are a radical left-wing. publishing house, absolutely fantastic. They publish lots of really important work. And they've just, after my first experience of publishing, it's just been such an incredible experience. What an amazing group of people. I mean, just so grateful to them for everything. My editor, the sales people and the PR people and distribution people have just been so lovely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you very much, John Pring, and good luck with your daily jog in a minute, and hopefully you'll make it 300 yards around and get back home again.
Let's hope. Let's hope. I haven't quite collapsed yet. I'm normally gasping at the end of it. Yeah. Thank you. That's been really good fun. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for your time.
This video was produced by Discover Voices, part of Disability Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. To check out all of our content, simply search Discover Voices on YouTube.